So I thought it'd be only fair as we get started with week 2 of this series about the battlefield of the mind, just to walk you through a battlefield that I encounter in my own mind on a fairly regular basis. And, over the last 15 or 20 years, I've gotten a lot better at these battlefields. A lot of times the battlefields that happened or would happen in my mind would overflow and spill out on the people around me. I've been known in my history, if you were to go back like high school, Clint, I had a pretty solid temper. I mean, honestly, college, undergrad Clint had a pretty solid temper. Honestly, I still have a pretty solid temper. But I've gotten better. I've gotten better at hey, there's some places this is not appropriate, and which is like 99.9% of the places. Just me alone in the woods is a decent place to let that out. But other than that, hey, I gotta figure out a way to control this thing, right? And so I've worked on that and worked on that. There's one place where I constantly fail. And that's if you're interested, if you're I would like to see that. Let me tell you what you need to do. You need to see my truck coming down the road and wait till I get close to you and pull out in front of me. And then you will see it. You will see, you also hear it. If my windows are rolled down, you'll hear it a little bit. And even if your windows are rolled up and my windows rolled up, my hand is going to the horn. And I'm going to lay on the horn as long as until it feels like, this is a little absurd and it's been 10 minutes past that point. I'm just going to continue to lay on it and follow you down the road, letting you know, reminding you how just stupid you are. That's what I'm thinking in my mind. Now, the only thing that takes me over the top more than that is when my wife, in the middle of me letting people know how I feel, grabs my arm and tells me to stop. That makes me more angry. You know what I'm saying? It's like, hey, I am dealing with something right now. And she's like, yeah, we're doing this the wrong way. Don't tell me. You know what I'm saying? That's no good. I told the story at the 9 o'clock and I said, look, in my world, I wish I had a train horn attached to it. Like one of them, you know what I'm talking about? Like one of them, you know what I'm talking about? Big things. And after the 9, one of the girls, she had one sitting in her car. She brought it to me. I got it. It's right back there in the sound booth. I had to go put it down. I was like, oh, goodness. So I've got one. I'm going to figure out how to hook it up. And watch out, Noonan! No, I think I'm making light of moments where we lose control, things that cause anxiety and stress. But the truth is mental health is a giant problem. It's a David versus Goliath kind of problem. Just if you missed last week, let me just bring you up to speed on how big a problem it is. The National Institute of Mental Health gives us the most recent statistics. 40 million adults in the United States, that's almost 20%, experience anxiety disorders each year. 17.3 million adults in the U.S. experienced at least one major depressive episode in the past year. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among individuals aged 10 to 34 in the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration give us these 3 statistics. 57% of adults with a mental illness receive no treatment. Nearly 50% of people with a mental health disorder will experience a substance use disorder at some point in their lives. And 70% of youth in juvenile justice systems have at least one mental health condition. 67% of them receive no treatment. This is an enormous problem. It's a giant problem. And last week, we started off the series by actually looking at the story of David and Goliath, this giant problem. And we walked through it, and we were very intentional with how we wanted to start this series, because I wanted to make sure that it was very evident to everyone that the very first piece to the puzzle of mental health, I believe, is Jesus. It starts there. But, however, I want to also make sure that we don't over-spiritualize everything. And this is how we kind of showed this with David and Goliath. If you're not familiar with the story, there's a war that's happening between the Israelites, or the people of God, and the Philistines, which is a group of coastal region people that are pressing into the land that the Israelites occupy. And so they're fighting one another, but the fighting technically hasn't started yet. The armies are on both sides, and this huge guy named Goliath walks out of the Philistine army, and he says, hey, look, send your best fighter. We will fight 1v1. Whoever wins takes the whole cake, right? That's the whole idea. And he's been taunting them. Well, there's a guy named David. He's a teenager. He goes to take his brothers. He had 3 brothers who were in the fighting war with the Israelites. He goes to take them some food, get a report from the front lines, bring it back to his family. While he's there, he hears Goliath taunting them, and he's like, what in the world are we doing, guys? Like, who allows this guy to say what he's saying against God's people? Like, this isn't making sense. So he goes to the king, he has a conversation, and he's like, hey, here's the deal. I want to go fight the dude. And the king's like, no, you're like a boy. And he's like, here's the thing. Here's the big piece from last week. It doesn't matter who goes and fights him. The boy can go fight him. My brothers can go fight him. Any warrior can go fight him. Saul, he was the king. Saul, you could go fight him. It doesn't matter who we send to fight him. It also doesn't matter who we're fighting. It doesn't matter if it's Goliath, the entire Philistine army, or the Philistine army and all their friends. It makes no difference who goes to fight or who we're going to fight. The only thing that matters in this moment is who is sending us to fight. And he said, and here's the deal. God is sending us, which means the battle's already won. We just got to go. Doesn't matter who we're being sent to or who's being sent. The only thing that matters is who's doing the sending. It's a God thing. Now, we said that. I said, hey, that's a big deal. It's a spiritual decision when we enter into battlefields. It's a spiritual decision. It's a spiritual battlefield. We're going to face these things. However, David walks onto the battlefield. And what he does not do is he does not walk up to the giant. He doesn't walk up to Goliath and say, excuse me, you do your thing, battle warrior man, scary, grunty, bearded man. You do your thing, and I'm going to bow my head, and I'm going to pray you away. He doesn't say that. He didn't do that at all. In fact, when David goes out to him, he goes down to a stream, and he picks out some stones, and he puts them in his little pocket or a satchel, and he takes his shepherd's stick, and he goes, and he actually has combat with the guy that he's trying to fight. He didn't pray and think that God was going to take care of it. He said, no, God is sending me, and I'm going to take some tools with me that God will use to win the victory that I'm trying to seek after. And so we said last week, Jesus is a huge part of our mental health. He's the beginning. However, if we think we can just thoughts and prayers this stuff away, we're wrong. We got to go to a stream and pick up some stones. We got to have a stick in our hand. There's got to be some tools that we use to attack the giant. That is our mental well-being or inability to have mental well-being. And that's where we're at last week. Certainly there's a spiritual element to it. But the spiritual element also invites us to use some very practical tools. And this week and next week and the week after, we're going to look at some of those practical tools. So let's jump in this week. We're going to start with a story in the life of Jesus that's recorded by a guy named John. And John's one of Jesus' closest friends. Spent a ton of time with Jesus, was a big part of his life. And so got to witness this with his own eyes. And this is what he shares with us in John chapter 5. It says, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Now, in this is like a scene-setting paragraph that kind of tells us where we're headed and what's the context of where this is taking place. There's some festival. There's like 3 big pilgrimage festivals for the Jewish people where everybody would come back to Jerusalem. Doesn't tell us which of the 3 it is, but evidently it was important enough for Jesus and those folks to head back to Jerusalem at one of those festivals. So we don't know the time, we don't know the situation, other than it's one of those 3. It also tells us that there's a gate called the Sheep Gate. Now, Jerusalem, Old City Jerusalem, has a bunch of different gates. The Sheep Gate is thought, we're not sure, it's thought that it got the name because there were animal sacrifices at the temple. A lot of time they were lambs, and that's the gate they would bring them through, but we're not actually positive, other than it calls it the Sheep Gate. It also says that there's a pool called Bethesda. Now, this is interesting because the way it describes it is there's this huge pool, and it says there's 5 porches on this pool. And so as people started to think through this, the old city of Jerusalem, like, all right, how would you make a pool with 5, it's like a penta thing? Like, one, two, like they're trying to figure out how it works. Well, turns out it wasn't that at all, but they didn't know that until a little while later. But let me pause on that idea. For centuries, a lot of scholars thought that this part of John chapter 5 was made up because they couldn't find a pool. Like they couldn't find it, and something this large is like, well, how do you get rid of it? You know what I'm saying? They couldn't find it anywhere. Until 1888, there was an archaeologist that was doing some digging, and all of a sudden he found what is now known today and has been partially excavated as this pool of Bethesda. Now, only part of it is done. Now, here's the cool thing. They found the corners of all of it. But there's a huge grassy area with some trees and a little building that's kind of sitting on it that if you were to excavate the rest of it, that building would probably fall. They don't want that to happen. And so people are talking about, we need to excavate the whole thing. They haven't done it. But they have excavated into the corners, and it's just like it said. In fact, they were curious about, like, how would you have 5 porches on this pool? And it turns out, because like a little pool typically has 4 sides, right? Unless you got one of them kidney bean shaped pools, but that's new. That's new. They wasn't doing that back then. You know what I'm talking about? But at 4 sides, they actually put a porch in the middle, so it's separated into 2 different pools. And what they found when they went underground is that the 2 were actually connected by this little waterway that you could open and drain one pool into the other. It's a fascinating system. The rain would gather in one, and they could open this little gate up, and it would drain underneath the water into the other pool. In addition to that, they found some really fancy steps going into one side of the pool. And the only place in Jewish life where these particular steps would go into water, it wasn't like the community pool where it's like, hey, we're at the country club, let's go hang out, play pickleball, and go to the pool downtown Jerusalem. Now, the reason that you would have that is because it would be a ceremonial bath, like a place where if you were going to get clean and go to the temple, you would go and bathe yourself ceremonially through this religious rite would happen there. And so that's what they found. They found this place where all of these people would gather, and they found it in 1888, and they've been excavating ever since. You can go look at videos you want. I was going to show you a video, but I'm already late, so we're just going to keep going. Just believe me. Just Google it. Bethesda Pool, 1888. You'll see it on the YouTubes. Anyway, let's continue. Verse 5. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Now, when I think through, if I were to walk up to a group of people that are sitting beside this pool and all of them have these ailments, there was this superstition, this myth, this idea that if you were to get into the water, when the water's, the word the Bible uses is stirred, when the water was stirred, the first person in, it would heal, right? And so they're all just sitting around waiting for this stirring to happen, and they would jump in, and the first person in their mind, that's what was gonna happen. Well, that was the problem. So that's why people have gathered here. And so he looks at him and says, "Hey, do you want to get healed?" And if I'm the guy sitting on the pavement, or laying on the pavement, or whatever it is, and I look up at Jesus, I'm gonna say, that's the dumbest question anybody's asked me. Like, since I've been here for 38 years, you're asking me, do I wanna get well? That's the only reason I'm here. That's it. You see all these people around me? They stink. This is not good. This is not what I think is a good place I wanna hang out every day of my life. No. What do you mean, do I want to get healed? That's the way I would respond. That's not the way this guy responded. That's the way I would have responded. Now, I don't know if Jesus said it sarcastically. Like when he looked at the man, he was like, 38 years. You just got to jump in the pool. Like, do you even want to get well? Like, what is your problem? Or if he said it compassionately, Bible didn't tell us. Like when he looked at him, he was like, man, do you want to get well? I think Jesus is sarcastic, but I don't know. I think most people would say it's probably more compassionate than sarcastic. I think sometimes sarcasm can be compassionate. Just my dysfunction, though. Verse 7, he responds. He says, Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Now we're going to pause here just for a second, and we're going to get down a little rabbit trail, and then we're going to go back to the actual trail in a second. So we've paused. This story is the very first story I ever remember learning about the Bible. Now, I'm sure I heard other stories before this one. This is not like Bible Story 101, let's start here. But this is the very first story I have a memory of in my entire life. I was 4 years old, and I was in pre-K 4 at East Point Christian Kindergarten. And I was sitting, if you were to go into the place where parents drop your kids off, and you were to walk into the building, it was the very first classroom on the right. It had yellow walls. It had baby blue cabinets. Miss Lee was my teacher. She had a all gray pixie cut. She wore this dress that looked like a school teacher from the 1800s, and she sat on a stool, and she read to us Bible stories, and she would read a little bit, and then she would hold it out and show us the pictures, and then she would read a little bit, and she would show us the pictures, and I vividly remember something about the story that's not in the Bible. And that is, there was a picture of an angel that came down and stuck this huge wooden spoon in the pool and stirred it around. Now, the book didn't show, like, it wasn't, but you could see motion, right? There's some stirring happening with the wooden spoon. I don't know why the angel needed a wooden spoon, but that's what the angel had in this book. And I vividly remember it. And then, because when I was thinking about this, I was like, man, okay, I'm problem solving. I'm thinking to myself, when I hear the story as a 4-year-old, I'm thinking, you know what? I can solve this guy's problem because I have made a living as a 4-year-old at getting to the front of the line. I'm great at it. I'm always the line leader. Every single time, I am first in line. If you just let me talk to this guy, I can tell him, look, you're having trouble. There's ways to get around the systems that are being oppressed on you to give other people opportunities at the front. I can teach you this. That's what I'm thinking. And surely, one of those things was like, I'm going to partner with the angel to say, hey, you can give me a little heads up. I'll slide you a 20, something like that. You're going to let me know. I'm going to get my boy close. That's what we're going to do. Now, here's the problem. This is why it's a rabbit trail. When I got into high school, and I started reading the Bible for myself and not just like, hey, this is a school thing we do. It's then that I noticed that the angel was missing. And so I was like, what? How in the world did this happen? Now, if you were to go look at the King James Version of the Bible, that translation, verse 4, which you might have noticed, when we were walking verse by verse through this, we went to verse 3, and then we skipped 4 and went to 5. It's because in all the modern translations, verse 4 is not there anymore. This is what verse 4 used to say for about 350 years during the King James translation. This is verse 4. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. So for about 350 years, from the 1600s all the way until 50 years ago-ish, that's what the story said. However, the manuscripts we use to translate the Bible today are much closer to the time of Jesus than what the King James Version used. And none of the earliest manuscripts have verse 4 in them. I think this is significant because I think it's really important that Christians and the overall Christian community would be the first to raise our hand and say, hey, we got something wrong. And there's no reason if we make this new discovery, whether it's an archaeological discovery of a pool called Bethesda, or we find a manuscript that's much closer to the time of Jesus, to say, you know what? There was some human error involved. And I think this is a healthy way to accomplish anything in our lives when it comes to things that we are passionate about, whether it be something religious or something political. That if we were to find that we were wrong about something, that we would be publicly willing to say, I got it wrong. But that actually doesn't devalue the effort I put into it when I first did it in the 1600s or when I first believed what I believed. It just simply means I've gained more knowledge. I've experienced something that shows me the truth, and I want to make sure that everybody is aware of it. The easy thing to do would be to skip from verse 3 to verse 5 and then nobody would probably know. Most people don't read their Bibles anyway. So you could just make verse 5, verse 4, and make it seamless. But the right thing to do is to skip verse 4 and put a footnote that says, we got it wrong. And I think that's the way we should approach most things in our life. Certainly a little rabbit hole that I think is applicable in this political season. Time back in. So the guy gives his excuse. He's like, look, of course I want to get well, but I can't get first. Right? I'm trying to be first. I can't get there. Like every time this water gets stirred, some other guy, some other girl jumps in ahead of me. Now, when I hear this, as I'm Jesus, I'm thinking like, all right, look, let me give you a next step. You need to get closer to the pool. You know what I'm saying? Like stop trying to crawl there the whole time. Stay on the edge. Or if you're afraid you're gonna fall in, you need to learn to swim. Like you need to figure this out. There's ways to make this a little more efficient so you can get in the pool first. Or maybe Jesus would say, you know what? Let me talk to everybody. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, for 38 years, this guy's been trying to get first. The next time this happens, can y'all just chill for a second? Let the man, he's got 38 years of trying. Just let the man hop in. And then y'all can go back to like who's going to be first. But if y'all would just partner with me as a rabbi, that would be very grateful. I might have asked that. That's not what Jesus says at all. Jesus looks at the guy who gives an excuse, and then Jesus looks straight at him, and he says this, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. That's wild to me. The guy gives him an excuse, and Jesus doesn't even acknowledge it. And he says, no, I'd rather just give you a next step. Verse 9. At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. 38 years. And like that, life changed. Now, here's my big question. When did he get healed? Now, I think, pretty safe to say, as soon as Jesus says something, it takes place. But what if he had convinced himself that even though Jesus said I'm healed, I still don't know how to walk? What if he stayed on the pavement with legs that fully worked? Because he had that choice. It was his choice whether to get up or not. Jesus decided, I'm going to give you the opportunity to do something. But it was his choice whether or not he actually wanted to do something about what Jesus had given to him. That's a big question. I think that's the very same question Jesus would ask a lot of us. Do you want to be made well? Do you really want to be made well? I mean, how long have you been stuck in your mental health struggles? How long has depression been a part of your everyday world? How long have you made big decisions based upon the anxiety level that exists within you? Do you want to be made well? The truth is, often we become the biggest reason we can't get well. Now, you might say, hey, that's not fair. That's not fair because I didn't do this to me. Like the thing that has caused my anxiety or caused whatever I'm experiencing, someone else did in my direction. That it was wrong, it was disgusting, or fill in the blank, like it was like just completely out of the realm of what should be normal in someone's life, and they did that to me. Like it's external things that have caused what I feel internally. And because of that, you can't say that I'm to blame for why I'm not well because they're to blame. And you honestly might be justified in that idea, that they're to blame for the reason that you're unwell. However, that's not what the question is, or that's not what the statement says. It doesn't say that you're the reason you're unwell. It says that you might be the reason you can't get well. See, Jesus, he heals him. He comes up with an excuse, and then Jesus' response to his excuse is to tell him to do the one thing that he has already decided in his mind is impossible for him to do, which is to get up and walk. And I think there are moments, and maybe this morning is one of them for many of you, where you're hearing something stir inside of you that says, you should go get help. But you've already decided in your heart, that's the one thing I cannot do. The truth is, though, Jesus is completely aware of your limitations. However, he also knows that he has none. If Jesus asked you to do the impossible this morning, would you? Like if he asked you to do the one thing that you've already decided, I can't do that, would you? I think for many of us, it's two simple words that we've decided we can't do. Get help. We've got good reasons, though. There's 5 very prominent, common objections to why I won't get help. The first one is there's stigma and shame associated with it. Many people worry about what others might think if they go to therapy because it's associated with weakness or mental illness or a lack of control. They got a fear of being judged, especially in communities where therapy might be less accepted or understood. In particular, not to exclude anyone, but let me just speak from a place that I feel like I know a little bit about because I am one. From a guy's perspective, this would qualify. When we talk about communities where it's not accepted or welcomed or encouraged, for us guys, for sure, yeah, that's not a thing. Like, we're not interested in doing that. I find so many wives or ladies that are willing in terms of relationship counseling to do something about it, and they can't get their husbands to go and do something about it. I get it. I watch it. I see it in other people's lives, experienced it in my own life. I get it. The way to overcome this, though, is we need a few men who have more courage than most that would normalize this reality, that would be willing to share at a lunch table or in the middle of a conversation about how University of Georgia is actually okay, even though we only won by 1 yesterday. But in the middle of that conversation, as things go back and forth, you know what really helped my wife and I out? We went and saw this counselor, which I know y'all probably think is like, I can't believe you did that, but I'd do it again if we ran into that same problem. And if any of you ever get in a spot, I know a guy or I know a girl, that would help change it. Second reason is I should be able to handle my own problems, right? Some people feel like, hey, I should be able to solve my own problems. I don't need to go to outside help. It's a sign of strength to be able to handle my own problems. It's the way I was raised. That's the way my mom and daddy did it. That's my grandparents did it. I got to handle my own problems. I got to be able to figure it out. And if I can't figure it out, I'm not who I'm supposed to be. It's a self-reliant mindset, which in most circumstances is incredible. In other circumstances, it's debilitating. There's the issue of cost and accessibility. It's expensive. Insurance might not cover it. Or it's just a simple fact of I don't even know where to look. Like, what do I do? Google, like, who will talk to me and my wife? Who will talk to me about my anxiety? Like, what if like a Facebook ad on Marketplace comes up? It's like $29.99 a month, and I'll talk to you. You know, you just Zoom me. Like, how do I know? I get it. There's the fear of vulnerability. How could I open up to a stranger about personal struggles? They'll judge me. Surely this counselor isn't actually confidential. They're going to talk to somebody. They're just human, right? One of the most common ones, I would say, is this fifth one. It's the doubt about its effectiveness. Some people are skeptical about whether it'll actually work, whether it's a negative past experience they've had in counseling, or they think that talking about it won't actually solve anything, or that a counselor couldn't actually understand their situation. Because this one is such a huge topic, I wanted to give you just a few thoughts and statistics about its effectiveness. There is an analysis of 270 studies that were published in psychological bulletins, and that analysis found that 75% of people who attended therapy experienced improvements in mental health and well-being compared to those who did not receive therapy. According to the American Psychological Association, 80% of people who engage in therapy report that it has long-lasting benefits that continue after the therapy ends, improving their overall quality of life. A study from the Journal of Counseling and Psychology found that 70 to 80% of people in therapy reported improvements in life functioning, such as better relationships, increased self-esteem, and better emotional regulation. According to a study by the American Association for Marriage and Family, 90% of clients in marriage and family therapy report an improvement in their own emotional health. Now, you read a bunch of statistics like that, and you see it, and it's like, wow, those are big numbers. But I want to stop for a second, and I want to make sure that I'm pointing out the small numbers associated with those big numbers. When we look at those numbers, we see somewhere between 70, 80, 90% of positive things. But it also means, because it's not 100%, that sometimes 30% or 20% or 10%, it doesn't work. So why is that? And what if you're one of those people who's like, I can attest, it doesn't work. It is not good. Yeah. Look, counseling is not a miracle. And your therapist is not Jesus. And the truth is, any good counselor will tell you, I don't always bring my A game. Like, I want to, but I'm not always at my best. Like, some days I do see it wrong. And some days I don't ask the best questions. And some days I don't help people discover what a good next step is, the best way. And some days I didn't bring the best of me. I don't know if you can relate to that. Maybe you've had days at work where you weren't your best. And maybe the results show that maybe you weren't your best. I know as a pastor, the primary thing people see and think that I do is what I'm doing right now on Sunday morning. You'd maybe not be surprised at how many people ask, what else do I do for work other than just talk on Sunday mornings? It's like, I work at a church. Yeah, on Sundays. What do you do the other rest of the week? Yeah, all right. Well, nothing. I just play games. But man, I'd like to think that every time I get up here and teach that it's jam up. But it's not. I've gone back and watched some. There's really bad ones. Because it's people. That being said, though, we have to have a realistic expectation when we engage with people. But the truth is, people that have made this their life's calling to help people take healthy next steps, they get it right much more often than they get it wrong. Which means there's probably some of you that need to give it another chance. Jesus asked the question, do you want to be healed? I think he's asking us the same question. And maybe we respond with the excuse of why we haven't yet. But I promise you this, Jesus' response to your excuse or explanation for why you've yet to be able to overcome the struggle, it's going to be a next step. It's going to be, well, this is what you should do about it. Therapy isn't a miracle. Counseling isn't a miracle. It's simply a stone for your sling that you can throw at the giant. That's what we're chasing down. And so to help with this, we brought the stream and the stones to you. You probably noticed the 4 tents that are outside, in addition to the other tents we have outside. It's like Tent City. It's like a flea market here some Sunday mornings. And the four tents that are up against the fence out there, those 4 tents are 4 organizations that we partner with in mental health and counseling and therapy that are in our community. And so they're here. They're here this week, next week, and the week after. 3 weeks in a row they're going to be here. And some of them go to other churches, but they're going to be here on these Sundays because they believe in the importance of what we're talking about. And they believe that you're valuable enough to say, hey, I'm going to come to where you are, which we're incredibly grateful for. And so that's all those tents are. Those tents are just the stream where it's our hope you would just go and pick up a few rocks to take into battle with you. That's it. That's it. And so when we think through this idea of how do we overcome barriers, how do we overcome the stigma? So I'm looking at those 5 objections, and I'm trying to solve all 5 objections on a Sunday morning. I'm trying to say, hey, I want to eliminate the stigma. I want to let you know that this is a normal thing, that we refer dozens and dozens of people to counseling and therapy every single year. Every single year. And this is a normal thing in our community. These are community counseling organizations that are a part of Noonan and what we're doing here in Coweta County. I want to bring them close because you might have no idea where to start and look. I trust these organizations. We've had a good track record with using them. Now, they all have their individual approach and style, and some of them might be more to you than others. That's okay. That's why they're out there. Go and talk. Go have a conversation about it. Go see what might resonate with you to say, I'd like to come and talk more about this. Now, the other thing that we've got to do to help overcome like this fear of going and talking to people, and it's this simple request. My request, and I do the same thing for the 9, I'll do the same thing next week and the week after, is that every single person that's here this morning at Foundation would go and visit at least 1 tent. And if we do that, if every single one of you will do that, then that will guarantee that every single person that's here that actually needs to go to the tent will go to the tent. But if you don't, if there's not enough people going to the tent, the chances are someone here is going to say, I wish I could go have a conversation, but I know as soon as I walk over there, everyone's going to look at me and think, I wonder what his problem is. I wonder what her issue is. And so if all of us go to the tent, it eliminates that. It eliminates it. So when we let out here in a few minutes, I'm going to go and stand outside, and I'm going to watch all of you leave. And if I know your name and you start walking off without going to the tent, I might ask you to come back and visit the tent. You know? Just kidding, I wouldn't do that. That would then cause you for real to need to go to the tent. In addition to bringing the stream and the rocks on campus today for you to pick up and put into your satchel or pockets, one of the other issues is finances. And I know that one of the big things is as you're thinking through this, you're like, look, I don't want to go because it is expensive. It can be from $75 to $120 depending on the credentials and the people you get partnered with. And so I know without a doubt, like you might be thinking, hey, I'm not going to spend money on something I don't think it's going to work. Like I don't have that kind of cash. I don't want to invest that kind of money. I don't want to do that. Like our budget's tight. I can't throw away the $100 on a Clint said this would be good for me and it ain't good for me thing. Well, let me tell you, for the last, so we started this in 2018, doing this with counseling organizations in Coweta County. Since then, we put aside funds every single year out of what we bring in an offering to make this available. And it's 365 days a year. It's not just during the series, it's any time. Any of you that decide, you know what, I want to go and try a Christian counselor, and you're like, hey, budget's tight, if you'll let me know, we will pay for your first visit. No questions asked. You don't have to tell me how it went. You don't have to give me any information. The only thing you got to do is you got to text in just to our number, which you can find on Google, and just say, hey, I made an appointment with let's just say Branches Counseling on September 29th at whatever time. This is our name, and then I'm going to take that information, I'm going to copy it out of our texting thing, I'm going to put it in an email, and we've already made all 4 of those, or anyone who charges out there, we've already made the arrangement for them that we're going to send the email and say, hey, this session, please send us the bill. And we won't miss it. I guarantee you, you do that, there's no chance we don't pay for it. Zero chances. We will not run out of funds. I promise you we won't run out of funds. I've had people from the other side of the country that have said, hey, I believe in what you're doing with this wholeheartedly. If you ever run out of money to send people to counseling, call me. They don't go to church here. They don't go to church here. They had some family that attended church here like a couple times, and they live in Seattle. But they were here on this Sunday last year. And we've called. I've called them another time and just say, hey, here's the deal. And they've sent money. I promise you, it can't happen. It won't happen. There's people that believe in this so much. Zero chance we run out of funds to make it happen. So if you want to go for the first time and budget's tight, all I need is the appointment time and where you made the appointment, and I'll send the email and they'll send the bill to us. So there's a river right outside with a bunch of stones to take and fight your giant. If finance is an issue, I got a stone for that too. Jesus is asking every one of us, do you want to be made well? Truth is, you have an excuse or an explanation. Jesus will listen. But his very next thing he's going to tell you, take a step. Stop sitting in your explanation. Stop sitting in your excuse. Take a step.